Jackson Carter was the epitome of success at 34 years old. As the CEO of a rapidly growing tech company in Austin, Texas, his life seemed almost scripted for perfection. He owned sprawling mansions, a fleet of luxury cars, and was surrounded by people eager to bask in his charisma and power. To Jackson, life was a series of conquests, whether in business or relationships, and he always emerged victorious. One breezy Saturday afternoon, Jackson and his friends found themselves in a less-than-expected spot for a group of wealthy professionals, a McDonald's near downtown Austin. For Jackson, it was a game, a chance to step into an ordinary life for a laugh. Seated at a back table, his friends bantered, their conversations light-hearted and mocking as they sampled greasy fries and burgers. "You've done it all," Jackson teased Mason Hughes, one of his childhood friends and a successful venture capitalist. "You've built an empire, dated every woman you wanted, but I doubt you'd win this next challenge." Jackson smirked, leaning back in his seat. "I'm listening." Mason raised an eyebrow, clearly relishing his role as provocateur. "I bet you can't marry a woman who's completely outside your world. And I'm not talking about influencers or heiresses. I mean someone truly ordinary." Jackson's interest peaked, though he kept his expression cool. "Define ordinary." Mason gestured discreetly toward a young woman wiping down tables nearby. "Like her. Jessica Monroe, single mom, works here to support her kid. I dare you to bring her into your world and make it work." Jackson followed Mason's gaze. The woman in question had warm chestnut hair tied into a messy ponytail, a tired but kind expression on her face. She was dressed in a worn McDonald's uniform that seemed to hint at countless long shifts. Jessica appeared to be in her early 30s, around 31, and there was a quiet resilience about her that caught Jackson off guard. For most in his circle, someone like Jessica would have been invisible. "You're serious?" Jackson asked, his voice laced with disbelief and amusement. "Completely," Mason replied with a sly grin. "If you pull it off, an actual marriage, no tricks or schemes, I'll transfer $2 million to you. Easy money for you, right?" The amount was insignificant to Jackson, but the challenge itself intrigued him. Marrying someone from a world so far removed from his own. It wasn't about the money. It was about proving that he could succeed at anything, even this. Jackson raised his iced tea in a mock toast. "Get your checkbook ready, Mason. This'll be easier than you think." The group erupted into laughter, already entertained by the drama they expected to unfold. But as Jackson glanced back at Jessica, his usual smugness faltered. For the first time in years, a challenge seemed genuinely daunting, and that only made him want it more. The bet lingered in Jackson's mind long after they left the McDonald's. He couldn't stop thinking about Jessica Monroe, the way her tired but determined eyes had seemed so out of place in the fast food chaos. She wasn't like the women he usually encountered, models, socialites, or corporate leaders who shared his glamorous world. There was something grounded about her, something real. The next Tuesday, Jackson returned to the same McDonald's, dressed casually in jeans and a fitted shirt. As Jessica moved between tables, wiping surfaces and collecting trays, he observed her silently. Her light laughter with a co-worker, the way she gently interacted with a crying child at a nearby table, it all caught him off guard. She wasn't bitter or weary, she seemed kind. When Jessica finally approached his table to clear an empty tray, Jackson made his move. "Jessica, right?" he asked, flashing a disarming smile. She paused, raising an eyebrow. "Yes. Can I help you?" "I'm Jackson." He introduced himself, leaning slightly forward. "I don't think you've served me before." Jessica tilted her head slightly, unimpressed. "I've worked here for over a year. If you've been here, you probably didn't notice." Jackson chuckled, appreciating her directness. "Well, I'm noticing now. How about I buy you a coffee sometime?" Jessica blinked, genuinely caught off guard. Her polite smile turned skeptical. "That's a first. No offense, but why would you want to?" "Why not?" Jackson countered smoothly. "I'd like to get to know you better." Jessica glanced at the growing line of customers behind him and sighed. "Look, I appreciate the offer, but I'm busy. And honestly, I'm not interested." Jackson wasn't used to rejection, especially not from someone he'd barely spoken to. But her response only fueled his determination. I get that you're busy, he said, his tone softening. But I'm persistent. You'll find that out. Jessica gave him a polite but unimpressed smile. Good luck with that, she said before walking away. The rejection didn't deter Jackson. In fact, it intrigued him. He returned a few days later, strategically timing his visit during Jessica's shift. This time, he sat in her section and ordered a meal, making small talk whenever she came by. How's work today? He asked casually as she refilled his drink. It's work, Jessica replied, glancing at him with mild suspicion. Not much else to it. You seem good at it, though, Jackson said, his tone genuine. The way you handled that rude customer earlier? Impressive. Jessica's lips twitched into a faint smile, though she tried to hide it. Comes with the territory. By the end of her shift, Jackson had managed to coax a few more smiles out of her. When she came by to clear his tray, he tried again. So, about that coffee, he said, keeping his tone light. Just 1 cup. No pressure. Jessica hesitated, her brow furrowing. Why are you so interested in me? I'm just a single mom working at McDonald's. You probably have 100 other things you could be doing. Jackson held her gaze, his expression sincere. Maybe that's exactly why. You're different from anyone I've met, and I'd like to know more about you. For the first time, Jessica seemed unsure. After a long pause, she sighed. Fine. 1 coffee. But it'll be quick. Jackson's smile widened. Deal. Later that week, they met at a small cafe near Jessica's apartment. She arrived in casual jeans and a loose sweater, her hair pulled into a bun. Jackson noticed she looked different outside her uniform, more relaxed, though still guarded. They sat at a quiet table in the corner, and Jackson took the lead. So, Jessica, how long have you been working at McDonald's? Almost 2 years, she replied, stirring her coffee. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and keeps my daughter taken care of. You have a daughter? Jackson asked, though he already knew. How old is she? Lila just turned 6, Jessica said, her expression softening. She's my everything. Jackson nodded, noting the way Jessica's face lit up when she talked about her daughter. That's amazing. She must be proud to have you as her mom. Jessica studied him, her skepticism returning. You don't need to flatter me, Jackson. I'm a single mom working 2 jobs to make ends meet. That's not exactly impressive. On the contrary, Jackson said earnestly, it's incredibly impressive. You're doing what most people wouldn't even try. Jessica let out a small laugh, though her tone was dry. Is this the part where you tell me you're a self-made millionaire and life's not so hard if you work for it? Jackson winced, caught off guard by her bluntness. Not exactly, but I'll admit my life's been different. I'm the CEO of a tech company. Work takes up most of my time. Jessica raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. Figured. Guys like you don't usually hang out at McDonald's. I'll admit it wasn't my usual stop, Jackson said with a grin. But I'm glad I did. Jessica rolled her eyes, though there was a hint of amusement. We'll see about that. As their conversation continued, Jessica began to relax slightly. They talked about everything from childhood memories to favorite books. And for the first time, Jackson found himself genuinely enjoying a connection that wasn't tied to power or status. By the end of the coffee, Jessica stood to leave. Well, that was surprisingly nice, she admitted. But don't think this means anything. Jackson smiled as he walked her to the door. 1 step at a time. I'll see you around, Jessica. As she walked away, Jackson felt something he hadn't expected. Genuine excitement. The bet was still in the back of his mind, but for the first time, it didn't feel like the driving force behind his actions. Jessica Monroe was more than just a challenge. She was someone he genuinely wanted to know. Over the following weeks, Jackson made a habit of visiting Jessica's McDonald's during her shifts. He kept their interactions light and respectful, careful not to push her too far. Slowly but surely, Jessica began to open up, though her guarded demeanor never completely faded. One Friday afternoon, Jackson showed up just as Jessica was finishing her shift. He waited by the counter, catching her attention as she tied her apron. "You're here again?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I figured you might want some company after work," Jackson said casually. "What do you think about taking Lila to the park tomorrow? It's supposed to be a nice day." Jessica hesitated, the cautious mother in her surfacing. "Why would you want to spend time with us? You don't even know us." Maybe I want to, Jackson said simply. No strings, no pressure. Just a day in the park. Jessica sighed, weighing her options. All right, but only because Lila loves the park. The next afternoon, Jackson arrived at Zilker Park, one of Austin's most beloved spots. Jessica was already there with Lila, who was racing toward the playground, her laughter echoing across the field. She's got a lot of energy, Jackson said as he joined Jessica on a nearby bench. She's 6, Jessica replied with a small smile. Energy comes with the territory. As Lila played, Jackson turned his attention back to Jessica. You're a great mom. You know that. Jessica shrugged. I'm just doing what I can. It's not always easy. Their conversation was interrupted when Lila ran over, holding a daisy she had picked. Mommy, look. It's for you, she exclaimed, handing it to Jessica. Jessica's face softened as she took the flower. Thank you, sweetheart. Lila turned to Jackson, her big eyes curious. Who are you? I'm Jackson, he said, crouching to her level. Nice to meet you, Lila. Are you Mommy's friend? Lila asked bluntly. Jackson hesitated, glancing at Jessica, who looked equally surprised. I hope so, he replied with a warm smile. Satisfied with his answer, Lila nodded and ran back to the playground. Jessica watched her daughter, a mixture of amusement and apprehension in her expression. She's straightforward. No filter. I like that, Jackson said, settling back into his seat. Honesty is refreshing. Jessica glanced at him, her expression softening despite herself. It is. As their outings became more frequent, Jackson found himself genuinely enjoying the time he spent with Jessica and Lila. It wasn't just about the bed anymore. He was starting to care for them, though he didn't quite know how to reconcile that with his original intentions. One evening, after taking Lila out for ice cream, Jackson and Jessica sat on the steps of her small apartment building. The night was quiet, the city's usual fading into the background. Why are you doing this, Jackson? Jessica asked suddenly, her tone more curious than accusatory. Jackson hesitated, caught off guard by the directness of her question. Doing what? This, Jessica said, gesturing vaguely. Spending time with me and Lila. You could be anywhere, doing anything with anyone. Jackson took a deep breath, realizing this was a pivotal moment. I guess I've spent most of my life chasing things that don't matter. Money, power, success. But with you two, it feels different. It feels real. Jessica studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly. That's a nice answer, but I'm not sure I believe you. I don't blame you, Jackson admitted, his voice soft. I haven't exactly earned your trust yet. But I'm not here to waste your time, Jessica. Jessica looked away, her defenses still firmly in place. We'll see. Not long after their talk, Jackson encountered an unexpected challenge. One evening, while he was walking Jessica and Lila back to their apartment, a man approached them. He was scruffy, with a worn look that suggested a hard life, and his eyes locked on Jessica. Jess, the man said, his voice rough. We need to talk. Jessica froze, pulling Lila closer. What are you doing here, Ryan? Jackson's body tensed, instinctively stepping in front of Jessica and Lila. Is there a problem? Ryan ignored Jackson, his focus solely on Jessica. I want to see my daughter. You haven't cared about Lila for years, Jessica said sharply. Why now? Ryan hesitated, his expression faltering. I made mistakes, Jess. I want to make things right. Jessica shook her head, her voice firm. We've moved on, Ryan. You had your chance. Ryan's gaze flickered to Jackson, his eyes narrowing. And who's this guy? Your new boyfriend? That's none of your business, Jessica replied, her voice trembling slightly. Ryan scoffed, but didn't push further. This isn't over, Jess. I'll be back. As Ryan walked away, Jessica let out a shaky breath. Jackson placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Are you okay? Jessica nodded, though her composure was clearly shaken. He's Lila's father. He's trouble. Jackson glanced down at Lila, who was holding on to Jessica tightly, her face buried in her mother's side. Do you want me to stay? Just in case? Jessica hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I think I'd feel better if you did. Jackson stayed with Jessica and Lila that evening, keeping a quiet but watchful presence. He could see the tension in Jessica's face, though she tried to stay composed for Lila's sake. They settled on the couch, Lila nestled against her mom, her eyes drooping as Jessica stroked her hair. Once Lila was asleep, Jessica carefully carried her to bed. When she returned to the living room, Jackson was still there, sitting quietly with a contemplative expression. "Thank you for staying," Jessica said softly, sitting down across from him. "I wasn't sure if he'd come back tonight." Jackson nodded. "You don't have to explain anything, but if you want to talk about it, I'm here." Jessica hesitated, then sighed. "Ryan and I were together when I was young, too young to know what I was getting into. He was charming, fun, but unreliable. When I found out I was pregnant with Lila, he promised he'd change. He didn't." Jackson's jaw tightened. "Did he hurt you?" "Not physically," Jessica said quickly, shaking her head. "But emotionally, it was like living with a ghost. He'd disappear for days, then show up with excuses. When Lila was a baby, he left for good. No calls, no support, just gone. And now he wants to come back?" Jackson asked, his voice laced with frustration. Jessica shrugged, her expression bitter. "Ryan's great at saying what people want to hear, but I don't trust him. He's not a part of our lives anymore, and I'm not letting him disrupt Lila's world." Jackson nodded, his admiration for Jessica growing. "You're strong. Lila's lucky to have you." Jessica gave him a faint smile. "It's not about being strong. It's about doing what's necessary." In the weeks that followed, Jackson's bond with Jessica and Lila deepened. He spent more time at their apartment, helping Jessica with errands and playing games with Lila. He also noticed that Jessica seemed more at ease when he was around, though she was still cautious about letting her guard down completely. One afternoon, they went on a trip to a small local fair. Lila's eyes lit up at the colorful rides and booths, and she ran ahead to a balloon stand, tugging Jessica's hand. "Can we get one, Mommy?" Lila asked, her voice filled with excitement. Jessica smiled. "Of course. Which one do you want?" Lila pointed to a bright red balloon shaped like a heart. The vendor handed it to her, and she clutched it tightly, her smile contagious. As they wandered through the fair, Jackson watched Lila's joy with a sense of wonder. He had spent years surrounded by luxury, but nothing compared to the simple happiness of this moment. Jessica caught his gaze and raised an eyebrow. "What's that look for?" she asked. "Just thinking," Jackson said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I've never had this before. It's nice." Jessica tilted her head, her expression softening. "You mean normalcy?" "Yeah," Jackson admitted. "Normalcy. Happiness without strings attached." Jessica didn't respond, but something in her eyes told Jackson that his words had struck a chord. Jackson knew his feelings for Jessica had grown far beyond the initial bet. She had become someone he truly cared for, and the time he spent with her and Lila felt more meaningful than anything in his life. He couldn't imagine going back to the empty world he'd known before. One evening, as they walked home from the park, Jackson decided to take a leap. He slowed his pace, letting Lila run ahead, and turned to Jessica. "Jessica, I need to tell you something," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Jessica frowned, sensing his seriousness. "What is it?" Jackson reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a simple but elegant ring. "I want to marry you." Jessica froze, her eyes widening in shock. "Jackson, we've only known each other for a few months." I know it's fast," Jackson interrupted, his voice steady. "But I've never been more sure of anything. You and Lila have changed my life in ways I never expected. I don't just want to be part of your life. I want to build one with you." Jessica stared at him, torn between disbelief and the emotions welling up inside her. "This is crazy," she said softly. "You don't even know everything about me." "Then let me learn," Jackson said, his eyes earnest. "We could take it slow if you want, but I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm serious about us." Jessica glanced toward Lila, who was playing with a stick she had found on the sidewalk. Her daughter's happiness was her priority, and the thought of giving Lila a stable, loving family was impossible to ignore. After a long pause, Jessica met Jackson's gaze. "All right," she said, her voice trembling, "but you'd better mean it." Jackson smiled, slipping the ring onto her finger. "I do. More than anything." Lila ran back to them, her eyes wide. "Mommy, what's that?" Jessica knelt down and hugged her daughter tightly. It means we're going to be a family. Jackson joined the embrace. And for the first time in years, Jessica allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a brighter future. After Jessica said yes, things moved quickly. Jackson, true to his word, made every effort to ease Jessica and Lila into his life. He arranged for them to move into his penthouse in downtown Austin, a luxurious space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. For Lila, it was like a dream come true, but Jessica felt out of place. "This is a lot," Jessica admitted during their first dinner in the new home. They sat at a long dining table, with Lila happily munching on chicken nuggets while the adults had a more formal meal. "It's just a place," Jackson said, sensing her unease. "What matters is that you're here." Jessica gave him a small smile, but remained quiet. The luxury surrounding her felt overwhelming, a stark contrast to the modest life she'd known. Still, Jackson's efforts to make her feel comfortable didn't go unnoticed. As weeks passed, Jessica began to adapt. Jackson carved out time in his busy schedule to be with her and Lila, often rearranging meetings or skipping corporate events entirely. He joined them for simple activities, playing board games, watching cartoons with Lila, and even attempting to help with her school projects, though his skills in crafting left much to be desired. One evening, as Jessica watched Jackson fumble with a pair of scissors while trying to cut construction paper for Lila's science project, she couldn't help but laugh. "You're terrible at this," she teased. "I'm a fast learner," Jackson replied, grinning. "Besides, I think Lila likes my designs." Lila giggled. "They look funny, but I like them." Jessica shook her head, her laughter softening into something warmer. For the first time, she saw a version of Jackson that felt real and grounded, far removed from the confident CEO she had first met. Just as Jessica began to feel more at ease in her new life, Ryan reappeared. One afternoon, while Jessica and Lila were out grocery shopping, he confronted them in the parking lot. His disheveled appearance and intense demeanor immediately put Jessica on edge. "We need to talk," Ryan said, blocking their path to the car. Jessica pulled Lila closer. "I've told you before, Ryan. We're done. I deserve to see my daughter," Ryan insisted, his voice rising. "You can't keep her from me. You had years to be in her life, and you chose to leave." Jessica shot back, her tone firm. "You don't just get to show up now because it's convenient for you." Ryan's gaze flickered to Lila, who was clinging to Jessica's leg, clearly frightened. "I'm her father, Jess. A father takes responsibility," Jessica said coldly. "You don't get to intimidate me into giving you what you want." Before Ryan could respond, Jackson arrived. He had been waiting nearby in his car, sensing something was wrong. He stepped out, his expression calm but resolute. "Is there a problem here?" Jackson asked, placing himself between Ryan and Jessica. Ryan sneered. "You must be the rich boyfriend. Think you can buy your way into my daughter's life?" Jackson didn't rise to the provocation. "I think you need to leave. Now." Ryan's jaw tightened, but after a moment, he turned and walked away, muttering under his breath. Jessica let out a shaky breath, pulling Lila into her arms. "Thank you," she whispered. "Are you okay?" Jackson asked, his voice gentle. Jessica nodded, though her composure was clearly shaken. "I just hate that he keeps coming back." The confrontation with Ryan left Jessica rattled, but it also strengthened her bond with Jackson. However, just as things seemed to settle, a new challenge emerged, one that threatened to destroy everything they had built. One evening, Jackson was reviewing documents in his home office when he came across an old news article about one of his company's acquisitions. It was about a small factory in a rural Texas town that had been shut down years ago due to budget cuts. The decision had saved $1 million, but had left hundreds of workers jobless. As Jackson read further, a terrible realization dawned on him. The factory had been located in Jessica's hometown. His decision, made without a second thought, had directly impacted her life, forcing her into the struggles she now faced. The weight of this revelation was unbearable. Jackson knew he had to tell Jessica, but he also knew the truth could ruin everything between them. That evening, as they sat together on the couch, Jackson took a deep breath. "Jessica, there's something I need to tell you." Jessica turned to him, her expression curious but calm. "What is it?" Jackson hesitated, his guilt heavy. "Years ago, my company shut down a factory in your hometown. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was the one where you worked." Jessica's face froze, her eyes widening in shock. "What are you saying?" Jackson's voice faltered. "I'm saying that my decision to close that factory, it's the reason you lost your job. The reason you had to move here and start over. I didn't know it would affect you, but that doesn't change the fact that it did." "I'm so sorry, Jessica." Jessica stood abruptly, her expression a mix of hurt and disbelief. You did that? You're the reason I lost everything?" "Jessica, please," Jackson said, standing as well. "I didn't know." "But you didn't care either," Jessica interrupted, her voice shaking. "It was just numbers to you. Profits. And now you expect me to just forgive you?" "I don't expect anything," Jackson said quietly. "I just needed you to know the truth." Jessica turned away, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this right now, Jackson. I need time." She walked out of the room, leaving Jackson alone with his guilt. The days following Jackson's confession were tense and painful. Jessica avoided him as much as possible, her anger and sense of betrayal palpable. Lila, too young to understand the situation, noticed the change in the atmosphere and clung to her mother even more. For Jackson, the silence was excruciating. He replayed their conversation over and over, realizing how much his past decisions had hurt not only Jessica, but countless others. Determined to make things right, he began working on a plan. He reached out to his board of directors, making arrangements to sell the company. It wasn't an impulsive decision. It was one he had been contemplating for weeks. Jackson realized that his life as CEO was no longer fulfilling and that clinging to power would only remind him of the harm he had caused. Selling the company would give him the freedom to focus on the things that truly mattered. Just as Jackson began taking steps to repair the damage, another blow struck their fragile relationship. Mason, his old friend and the one who had initiated the bet, arrived unannounced at Jackson's penthouse one evening. Jessica was in the kitchen when she heard their voices, tense and sharp. "Mason, this isn't a good time," Jackson said, his tone cold. "Oh, come on," Mason replied, his voice dripping with mockery. "Don't tell me you've forgotten about our little wager. How's the wife to be handling it?" Jessica froze. She stepped into the living room just in time to see Mason smirking, completely unaware of her presence. "What wager?" she asked, her voice like ice. Mason turned, startled, and then smiled slyly. "Oops, did I ruin the surprise?" Jessica's gaze shifted to Jackson, her eyes blazing. "What is he talking about?" Jackson's heart sank. "Jessica, let me explain." Mason interrupted, clearly enjoying the chaos. "It was a simple bet. $2 million if Jackson could marry someone ordinary, someone like you." "Didn't he tell you?" Jessica's breath caught, and her face went pale. "Is that true?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Jackson stepped forward, his expression desperate. "It started as a bet, yes, but it stopped being about that a long time ago. I swear, Jessica, everything I feel for you is real." Jessica shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You used me. You played with my life and my daughter's life for money." "It wasn't about the money," Jackson insisted, his voice breaking. "It was stupid, and I regret it, but I fell in love with you. That's the truth." Jessica didn't wait to hear more. She grabbed her purse and called for Lila, who was playing in her room. "We're leaving." "Jessica, please don't go," Jackson pleaded. "I'll do anything to fix this." She turned back, her expression cold. "You've done enough." After Jessica and Lila left, Jackson was consumed by guilt and despair. The penthouse, once vibrant with their presence, now felt cold and empty. He tried calling Jessica multiple times, but she ignored every attempt to reach her. Determined not to give up, Jackson threw himself into action. He finalized the sale of his company, using a significant portion of the proceeds to create a community fund for the workers affected by the factory closure in Jessica's hometown. He also began volunteering at the new community center he helped fund, spending his days working directly with families in need. Word of his efforts eventually reached Jessica through mutual acquaintances. Though she didn't respond to him directly, She couldn't help but notice the sincerity of his actions. It wasn't just talk. Jackson was genuinely trying to change. Several weeks later, Jessica agreed to meet Jackson for coffee. She arrived at a small cafe, her demeanor cautious but curious. Jackson was already there, waiting nervously. "Thank you for coming," Jackson said as she sat down. Jessica crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "What do you want, Jackson?" "I want to say I'm sorry," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Not just for the bet, but for everything. For hurting you, for not being honest, and for the decisions I made that affected your life. I've sold the company. I've left that world behind. I'm not here to win you back with money or promises. I just want you to know that I've changed." Jessica studied him for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. "You can't undo the past, Jackson. The damage is done." "I know," Jackson replied quietly, "but I hope I can prove to you that I'm not the man I used to be. You and Lila mean everything to me, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving that if I have to." Jessica's expression softened, though her guard remained up. "You've done a lot. I'll give you that. But trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight." "I don't expect it to be," Jackson said. "I'm willing to take it one day at a time." After a long pause, Jessica nodded. "All right, one day at a time." Jackson's commitment to earning Jessica's trust was unwavering. He continued his work at the community center, often involving Jessica and Lila in activities to help strengthen their bond. Slowly, their relationship began to heal. Lila, who missed Jackson deeply, was thrilled to have him back in her life. "Are you and Jackson friends again, Mommy?" she asked one evening. Jessica smiled softly. "We're working on it, sweetheart." As the months passed, Jessica saw a genuine transformation in Jackson. He was patient, kind, and entirely focused on their well-being. She couldn't deny that the man standing before her now was completely different from the one who had walked into McDonald's months ago. Months passed, and the relationship between Jackson and Jessica steadily grew stronger. Jessica still harbored some reservations, but Jackson's consistent actions spoke louder than any words. He was deeply involved in the community center, dedicated to helping others in ways he hadn't thought possible before. His transformation from a self-centered CEO to a man committed to meaningful change was undeniable. One sunny afternoon, Jackson surprised Jessica and Lila with a picnic in Zilker Park. He had planned everything himself: simple sandwiches, fresh fruit, and a blanket spread out near the playground. As Lila played with a group of kids, Jessica and Jackson sat side by side, enjoying the peaceful moment. "You've really changed," Jessica said softly, her gaze thoughtful. Jackson nodded, his expression serious. "You and Lila changed me. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm living for something real." Jessica looked at him, her walls finally beginning to crumble. "I've seen that, and I believe you." Jackson reached for her hand, holding it gently. "Jessica, I love you, and I love Lila. I want us to be a family again, for real this time. No lies, no games." Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of anger or sadness. "I love you too, Jackson, but we have to take this slow. I need to know that this is forever, for me and for Lila." Jackson nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Forever sounds perfect." 6 months later, Jackson planned a special evening to make his intentions clear. With Lila's help, he decorated Jessica's apartment with candles and fairy lights, creating a warm, intimate atmosphere. When Jessica arrived home, she was greeted by Lila, who handed her a card that read, "Turn around." As Jessica turned, she saw Jackson standing in the middle of the living room, holding a small velvet box. This time, there was no hesitation in his voice. "Jessica Monroe," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "you've shown me what love, strength, and resilience truly look like. You've taught me the value of family and the power of second chances. I promise to spend the rest of my life making you and Lila happy. Will you marry me?" Jessica's breath caught, her eyes filling with tears as she nodded. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Lila jumped up and down, clapping her hands. "We're going to be a real family." Jackson slipped the ring onto Jessica's finger, pulling her into an embrace as Lila joined them, wrapping her small arms around both of them. In that moment, their future felt certain. The wedding was a modest but heartfelt celebration, held in a small outdoor venue surrounded by close friends and family. Jessica wore a simple but elegant dress, and Lila served as the flower girl, beaming with pride. Jackson, dressed in a classic suit, couldn't take his eyes off his bride. As they exchanged vows, Jackson spoke from his heart. "Jessica, I promise to honor you, to support you, and to love you for the rest of my life. You've given me a reason to be better, and I'll never take that for granted." Jessica's voice trembled as she responded. "Jackson, you've shown me that people can change. You've earned my trust, my love, and my respect. I promise to stand by you as we build this life together." After the ceremony, Lila ran up to them, clutching their hands. "This is the best day ever." Jessica and Jackson laughed, their hearts full as they embraced their daughter. For the first time, they felt like a true family. In the months following their wedding, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Jackson continued his work at the community center, and Jessica became an active volunteer, helping single mothers navigate their own challenges. Together, they turned the center into a hub of hope and support for struggling families. Lila thrived in the stability of her new family, growing closer to Jackson every day. One evening, she surprised him by calling him Dad, a moment that brought tears to Jackson's eyes. A year after their wedding, Jessica and Jackson received unexpected news. They were expecting a baby. The announcement brought a new wave of joy to their lives, and Jackson, overwhelmed with emotion, vowed to be the father he had never imagined he could be. When their baby girl was born, Jackson held her in his arms, tears streaming down his face. Jessica watched him, her heart full. "You're an amazing father," she whispered. Jackson smiled, kissing her forehead. "It's because I have the best partner by my side." Years later, the family of four flourished. Lila, now a confident young girl, loved her role as an older sister. Jessica and Jackson continued their work in the community, becoming pillars of support and inspiration for those around them. Their home was filled with laughter, love, and the warmth of a life rebuilt on honesty and trust. For Jessica, the scars of the past were no longer burdens, they were reminders of how far they had come. And for Jackson, every moment with his family was proof that true success wasn't measured by wealth or power, but by the love and happiness shared with those who mattered most. As they sat together one evening, watching their daughters play in the backyard, Jessica leaned against Jackson and whispered, "We did it." Jackson wrapped his arms around her and smiled. "No, you did it. You showed me what really matters." Their journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. A testament to the power of forgiveness, transformation, and the unbreakable bonds of family.